Welcome to The Explainer. So let's just dive right in, because today we are unpacking a seriously dense, multi-layered political broadcast. We're looking at a recent hour of news that covers, well, an incredible amount of ground. My goal today? To help you cut through all that noise. We're going to analyze exactly how modern media weaves these wildly disparate, complex narratives together into one continuous stream. I mean, think about it. How does a single news hour connect civil rights groups, Twitch streamers, and a literal cure for childhood deafness, right? It sounds like the setup to a really strange joke, but it's actually a masterclass in modern news programming. We're going to trace these exact threads to see how vastly different stories get stacked right side by side to create a comprehensive worldview for the viewer. To make sense of this absolute water hose of information, the broadcast breaks down into 5 key themes: institutional controversies, electoral strategy, impeachment speculation, media and class, and finally, a healthcare breakthrough. Let's start right off the top with our first theme, institutional controversies, specifically looking at the Southern Poverty Law Center. The broadcast opens up with this pretty shocking contrast. On one side, you have the SPLC's stated mission, which is dismantling violent extremist groups. But on the other, the broadcast details these recent Department of Justice indictments, claiming the organization was secretly funneling funds to extremist leaders. Specifically, the broadcast reports that the SPLC has been indicted on some serious charges of wire fraud and money laundering. Now, according to the broadcast's reading of this DOJ indictment, a staggering $3 million was allegedly funneled from donors to extremist leaders between 2014 and 2023, and that allegedly includes the KKK. This segment really leans into the 2017 Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, claiming one of its organizers was literally on the SPLC payroll for $270,000. The broadcast is arguing here that the SPLC essentially funded these groups to manufacture a racist threat. And then they use that threat to justify their hate map, a map that corporate America allegedly used to debank conservative individuals and groups. The source even points out that mainstream conservative organizations, like Turning Point USA, were added to this map just months before they experienced some truly tragic events. Shifting gears entirely, we move to Section 2, Redistricting and GOP Strategy, where they look at the electoral nuts and bolts. The broadcast really zeroes in on the mechanics behind recent GOP electoral defeats, specifically focusing on Virginia. The state shifted from a relatively balanced 6-5 map to what the source notes is a 9-11 or even 10-1 Democrat-leaning map. The main point they're making is that while Republicans express a lot of frustration over aggressive Democratic redistricting in states like Massachusetts and California, which go 9-0 and 48-4 for Democrats, Republicans are totally failing to capitalize on similar strategies or adapt to the current rules of the game. So, you might be asking, what exactly went wrong for the GOP? Well, guest Sean Spicer outlines what he calls a severely outdated playbook in a pretty blunt strategic postmortem. Instead of focusing on grassroots communication, door knocking and phone banking, the party is just jamming millions of dollars into last-minute cable TV and broadcast news ads. The broadcast highlights this immense frustration that a massive Trump war chest, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, was basically just sitting idle instead of being utilized to help those absolutely crucial on-the-ground efforts. That brings us to our third section, speculating on future impeachments, which dives into internal Democratic debates. Citing a recent Axios report, the broadcast highlights a push by resistance-minded progressive House Democrats to build a day-one impeachment case against Donald Trump, assuming, of course, they retake the House in the midterms. The broadcast frames this as a continuation of what they call Trump derangement syndrome, questioning whether the Democratic Party actually has a solid policy platform to offer voters, or if it's just a constant, relentless focus on fighting Trump. But hey, not everyone in the party agrees on this approach. Democratic strategist Dan Turntine issued a pretty stark warning. He said, if voters think that if we put you back in power, you're focused on your own retribution and grievance, we very well may blow what is a golden opportunity. So moderate strategists see repeating these impeachments as a massive political risk that actually ends up empowering Trump, while the progressive base is out there continuing to demand it. Moving right along, we transition to Section 4, Media, Class, and Luxury Beliefs, looking at the cultural critique. Here, the broadcast highlights a fascinating cultural paradox by looking at a recent New York Times profile of Twitch streamer Hassan Piker. Now, Piker has an estimated net worth of $8 million, yet he openly praised piracy, bank robberies, and even justified the murder of a CEO as social murder. What the broadcast finds really alarming here is that despite this extreme and violent rhetoric, Piker is fully embraced by elite institutions and frequently hosts high-profile Democratic politicians right on his channel. And this brings us to a really crucial concept used in the broadcast: luxury beliefs. These are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while inflicting real-world costs and consequences on the working class. The broadcast argues that wealthy elites validating radical behavior, like a millionaire Twitch streamer glorifying theft or an elite journalist admitting to shoplifting from Whole Foods, is a massive display of class privilege. The implication being, if working-class people actually engaged in these behaviors, they wouldn't get a New York Times profile. They would simply end up in prison. Guest Jillian Michaels actually offers a psychological theory for this. She argues that instead of elites utilizing their wisdom to educate disenfranchised youth, an older, wealthy generation is just indulging in normalizing destructive behavior out of pure insecurity. It's like this desperate need for these elites to feel cool and relevant to an angry younger generation, rather than providing actual, grounded guidance. Finally, we arrive at our fifth section, a breakthrough in healthcare, looking at some major policy highlights. The broadcast intentionally shifts its tone here away from partisan gridlock to highlight a truly landmark achievement, a first-of-its-kind FDA-approved gene therapy from Regeneron that can actually cure childhood deafness. The source credits this directly to an agreement made by the Trump administration with Regeneron, which also included a commitment to most favored nation drug pricing to really slash costs and increase accessibility. Which leaves us with a really provocative final thought. How often do life-changing policy wins, like literally curing childhood deafness, get totally eclipsed by the loud partisan conflicts that dominate our news cycles? The broadcast argues that in any other era, this would be the biggest story of the week. Instead, it just gets buried. It's a powerful reminder of how modern narratives prioritize outrage over actual solutions. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning what you see.